They say basketball is a marathon, not a sprint. And no team represents that idea better than the Boston Celtics. For seasons on end, the city enjoyed a team which sat at the top of the Eastern Conference. But with the joy that came to the fans, were humps the beloved team could not quite get over, which came in the form of one, LeBron James. Along the way came the beauty of both devastation and fortune, which gelled into some of the most wild twists and turns any organization has faced in the better part of the last decade. So let's flash back, all the way back to 2017. The summer of 17 marked a new chapter for the Brad Stevens-led Celtics. In July, team executive Danny Ainge signed one of Stevens' very own, his first and only lottery star he coached at Butler, to a 4-year max contract. If you couldn't tell by the image, his name is Gordon Hayward. After making his first All-Star team and helping Utah win 50 games that spring, Hayward was well on his way to becoming a perennial All-Star as a Boston Celtic. His new franchise, meanwhile, was living pretty large. Being only 4 years removed from the Kevin Garnett-Paul Pierce trade, Boston garnered a fruitful treasure chest of lottery picks at the Nets' expense. And after leaving all those picks unprotected, Brooklyn seemed like they'd be perpetually tied to the lottery and punishment, while Boston would enjoy one top 5 pick after another. In 2014, though, the team also wasn't very good and got themselves a top 10 pick, which wasn't hand-wrapped by Billy King. That number 6 selection was used on OSU guard Marcus Smart. In need of a new identity, Marcus would soon become their culture setter, one that brings an unrelenting grit and a defensive toughness you love to play for, and as an opponent, hate to play against. Smart was imperfect and limited offensively, but soon became the quintessential off-ball guard off the bench supporting the Celtics' newest star in Isaiah Thomas. The acquisition of Thomas in 2015 led the Celtics back to the postseason behind 2 remarkable offensive campaigns, but after falling short in 5 games to Cleveland in the 2017 Eastern Conference Finals, they were the little engine that could. With a 5'9" guard leading the way, they were a great story the fans could fall in love with. But this is real life. Their title chances with IT at the helm were slim. Danny Ainge recognized this and took swings with both Nets picks. First in 2016 to grab USC's Jaylen Brown. And when they got the first overall pick the following season, they weren't interested in the top 2 consensus picks. Instead, Ainge wanted Jayson Tatum and traded back from number 1 to number 3, selecting the Duke product who they clearly believed in. By every count, Ainge was on one. Months later, he then traded Isaiah Thomas, just months after playing through a hip injury in the postseason, which would change the entire trajectory of his career. But no one exactly knew that for sure at the time, and so off to Cleveland he went for Kyrie Irving. It's very rare to see the top 2 teams in the conference then make a trade to try to upgrade one another's roster. But Kyrie wanted out of Cleveland, and for the Celtics, which had a bunch of depth and a lot of young talent already, they were not going to be able to afford Jay Crowder, who they included in the deal, along with the Nets' 2018 first-round pick. Being able to parlay all of those pieces to an upgrade at point guard made them one of the most exciting teams in the sport. And with Gordon Hayward coming to Beantown, the Celtics almost surely were going to have some of the best wing players in the game, as their title odds with a top-tier head coach, savvy veterans, and skilled perimeter talent seemed far better than before. But then, 5 minutes into their season, and Kyrie Irving's return to Cleveland, tragedy struck. Gordon Hayward suffered a gruesome, devastating leg injury on a lob attempt, which left not just the team, but the entire arena stunned. The unexpected shift in his career basically changed the team's entire plans. They no longer could rely on him being the same player he once was, or growing into a better version of himself than they initially saw in Utah. In his absence, the only bright spot that came was the added opportunity for Tatum and Brown to step into larger roles to grow and develop together. Just a few months later, the other addition in Kyrie Irving, who had been dealing with knee discomfort, underwent surgery removing screws from a 2015 procedure that ended his season in March, finishing the year with 55 wins. Their depth, in fact, continued to be their greatest calling card in spite of giving up a few assets to get Irving. Terry Rozier specifically went from a mid-first round pick who sat the bench mostly to a playoff star, adding flavor in the Celtics offense. Pair that with the vitality of their 2 young wing players, and the Celtics had by far one of the brightest futures of any team in the East. To go along with the young core, though, there were experienced veterans in Al Horford, Marcus Smart, and Aaron Baines, who played their roles well. They outlasted the 7-seeded Boston Celtics in a roller coaster first-round series, then nearly swept the 76ers after, before taking LeBron James to 7 games in the Eastern Conference Finals. At one point, those young wing players led the team up 3-2 on those Cavaliers. All they had to do was win one of 2 games, and they were playing in the NBA Finals. That can't be too hard, right? The postseason was almost the most magical ride yet. The young guys just continued to level up with more opportunity, rising up to the highest of stakes. And while they certainly raised their expectations, almost immediately, the bar was set on nothing short but the NBA Finals. And so, though they ended up losing that series in Game 7, when LeBron left for the Lakers and the Celtics got back 2 All-Stars from 2018, they were favorably the most stacked team in the Eastern Conference. The window, in fact, was wide open for everybody. That was the scope of things. With the experience and health they would add in 2018, the hope was they would only build off a highly successful playoff run, which meant many penciled them in to go to the finals. And before the year began, Irving said this.
Shared it with some of my teammates as well as the organization and everyone else in Boston. You guys will have me back. I plan on re-signing here next year.
So with his pending free agency too, the vibes were good. Yet, when Irving and Hayward returned, the realization was the team had too many cooks in the kitchen and only one basketball to share. With the reintegration of Hayward, who hadn't played in 18 months, the team began to pick up this weird kind of energy. Though Kyrie made his announcement before the year he would be back. Right when the team started to figure things out after a slow start to begin the regular season, a reporter asked Kyrie how he felt about it again, and he backpedaled on that same statement.
Has your mindset shifted though in regards to re-signing with Boston, like the announcement?
Ask me July 1st.
His free agency would then loom on the season, while his backup and Terry Rozier wanted to play more, as he too was an upcoming free agent that wanted to prove himself. All of that contract stuff separated the cooks in the kitchen even more. The two Jays nearly just brought the team to the finals, and now Kyrie Irving was telling them what to do, making them revert back into this complimentary role in favor of a guy who was not even committed to the team long term. In round 1, they handled Indiana admirably, but after beating the Milwaukee Bucks in Game 1 of the second round, they fell apart and lost the next 4 games. Within a week, a team that went from fighting for a title went to watching Kyrie bail to play with Kevin Durant in Brooklyn. In response, Ainge turned to Kemba Walker, an easygoing point guard star from Charlotte, who very much was a better locker room personality after making his first All-NBA team. Kemba was 2 years older than the latter, but that allowed the keys to be more freely handed to the Jays while he offered all-star support into his 30s. During the process, they lost Al Horford to Philadelphia, and honestly, who exactly could blame Al for leaving? Sure, Philadelphia was being run by a guy in Elton Brand who was trying to destroy the team, but at 33 years old, Horford was getting offered a 4-year deal worth over $100 million if Philly won a title. While Boston would miss what he brought to the table, they still got better during 2020. Gordon Hayward, in his second year back, was more comfortable, while Daniel Tice filled in the starting 5 role admirably. But most important of all were Jayson and Jaylen, coming off disappointing seasons by developing into clear-cut stars to begin the 2019-20 campaign. While Kemba was really good, Tatum made his first All-Star team. But then, after All-Star weekend, Kemba Walker missed time with knee swelling, actually getting his knee drained. Months later in the NBA bubble, he played in every playoff game, but by the second half of their playoff run, didn't look himself. Gordon Hayward, on the other hand, suffered a grade 3 ankle sprain in Game 1 of Round 1, and missed the bulk of the run too, which made Brad Wanamaker their 6th man. That would cost them big time down the stretch in the ECF. When Miami went narrowly up 3-1, they had literally no depth anywhere on the team. And so after forcing a Game 6, they were eliminated right then and there. Up until this point, Danny Ainge has done a remarkable job, but the 2020 offseason was where he really fumbled the bag. There were rumblings he may look to trade Kemba, who didn't exactly seem himself. But after teams saw him dump off Isaiah Thomas with medical concerns, it was highly unlikely they would fall for that trap again. In the draft, he then used the 14th pick from Sacramento, acquired from trading down to get Tatum, and used it on the draft's best shooter in Aaron Nesmith, or so they thought. They actually had 3 first-round picks in the night, and at the same time, they had Vincent Poirier and Enes Kanter accounting for a boatload of money over the luxury tax. And so, to clear a bunch of cap, they sold the 30th overall pick. And if you've watched the Grizzlies this season, you may know Desmond Bane, who was the one they acquired using Boston's pick. Along the way, Gordon Hayward opted out of his player option, signing in Charlotte on a monster contract, which granted his ex-team a $17 million trade exception. Yet, they could have used that to get Miles Turner and Doug McDermott from Indiana. Compare that offer to what Hayward turned into, half a year of Evan Fournier and Josh Richardson, and you can't deny the fact Boston just missed a big opportunity. That offseason was also very short, which killed the C's before 2021 could even begin. With the NBA wanting to start the year before Christmas, a condensed pandemic schedule meant missing Kemba to start the year, and perhaps rushing him back on the court out of necessity. And during his second year at the team, Walker never stayed healthy. Due to health and safety protocol, everyone else in the team was missing time. Games finals were canceled, then rescheduled, and what became a tiring and massively disappointing year for the franchise. They finished with the 7th seed, as many different people criticized the team as one that would fall asleep at the wheel far too often. It almost felt like the message Brad Stevens was trying to send wasn't quite getting through. And after being eliminated in 5 games in the first round, without Jaylen Brown, I might add, Danny Ainge decided to step down, which is what made it especially shocking to find out Brad Stevens would take his place. As Brad wasn't the medic reviving his team in 2021, he drew away a lot of criticism too. And so the guy filling his place was going to have to be able to get through to his players, extracting some of the bad habits which plagued them on both ends. Except the important thing was, Brad, after coaching the very team himself, was able to recognize what things he needed and what things they needed to get rid of. And so before hiring a coach, he offloaded the team's biggest liability. The Kemba Walker tenure wasn't exactly a bad move by the team. If he does end up getting hurt, which the Celtics could not foresee, it would have been a pretty good move. But with him now in the books making max money up until 2024, his health was far too big a concern to hold on to, as he was sent off to OKC with a 2021 first-round pick for Al Horford. Now the caveat in his case was the guaranteed money in his max contract. With just 2 years left in the deal, the money he was set to make in 2022 was only $19 million guaranteed if he made the finals. And if his team ended up winning the title, he would actually have it fully guaranteed. Stevens then hired a longtime NBA assistant Ime Udoka to be the team's newest head coach. The mid-level exception was used on Dennis Schroeder, looking to rehab his market value and what was deemed a low-risk, high-reward flyer, as Boston desperately needed guard depth after a failed Jeff Teague experiment. The reality was, Schroeder was the exact opposite of what the team needed to address. Bringing back Al into the starting lineup with Robert Williams was indeed a positive, but he himself was shooting anywhere in the mid-20s from three-point range. The dopamine hit of these new additions expired within weeks, simply because the team couldn't win. Through the fall, the C's were anywhere around 500, but basically all their losses came against inferior opponents, with the lack of structure making it appear like the Boston Celtics were broken. What made it all so frustrating was how good the team could be, yet how far back they found themselves in the standings as a talented and very much capable below 500 team. The problem with Schroeder was style. For a team which struggled with a your turn my turn attitude, the Celtics needed a guard who can push the tempo by getting out in transition to kickstart the offense while making quick reads and open shots in the half court. Instead, they got the Schroeder experience. He came in and promoted isolation basketball, which slowed down the offense, with bizarre lineups that had Marcus Smart playing off of him at shooting guard. Without a floor general and Marcus Smart providing just about no shooting gravity, defenses could load up and double team Tatum or Brown. And as Marcus couldn't make an open kick out three to start the year, no one else could either, outside Grant Williams and Josh Richardson. The players made closing games harder on themselves, and the rookie head coach wasn't being left off the hook. After a good offseason, everyone expected improvement, not stagnation. Udoka came in and preached the right habits and offensive refinements for his 2 stars, but his offense was predictable and unreliable. And while he had shown very little as the Celtics coach up until that point, his press conferences were best known for him calling out his players after every other loss. Now, the one silver lining was the defense actually took a big step forward from the 14th ranked unit to the top 10, but when they got leads, they continually blew them, as the season's bright spot was a game of Joe Johnson, who signed a little contract with the team so they could have enough reserves after safety protocols. While many people reacted heavily to the Celtics' poor starts, their defense continually got better and better with more continuity. Al Horford specifically was gradually more available and better on offense, as his IQ and agility defensively enabled Robert Williams to shift into the perfect role for his skill set. Ime had Rob match up on the opponent's worst shooter, staying in between him and the rim, serving as a backline rim protector very few saw coming. And his athleticism helped Boston shapeshift into a group that played together, was sharp rotationally, tough mentally, and faster down the floor. After getting over 500 finally on January 31st, Jaylen Brown tweeted, "The energy is about to shift," and the weird energy, which had surrounded the team for years, did indeed start to shift. They were one loss from the Pistons away from a 10-game winning streak going into the All-Star break, and before people knew it, the 23-24 11-seeded Celtics were playing better than any team in the league, even while players like Time Lord were missing games for the birth of a child, or when he tore his meniscus weeks later, they were resilient. The new GM was active at the deadline, trading away Schroeder to get under the tax, then giving up a few picks for a player Ime Udoka formerly coached in San Antonio and Derek White, along with acquiring Daniel Tice as an emergency backup center. In previous videos, I've talked about how bad a fit Tice was in Houston, but in Massachusetts, he was in a far more familiar setting and would serve as one of the more capable backup bigs if and when Robert Williams missed time. And then for Derek White, a quick, smart guard who knows his his role was a much better scheme fit than the previous guard, even though he could not make an open shot. After clinging to the end of the playing tournament the first half of the year, they nearly finished the season as the Eastern Conference's #1 seed. Their 28-7 finish to the year put opposing teams on notice. And yet, it wasn't like they acquired Jason Kidd mid-season. Yet, many people in the first round thought they could not handle KD and Kyrie. And they were wrong. The heavy preseason favorites, with the apparent best player in the world, got swept. It was one of, if not the closest sweep effort, to be sure, but after dominating last postseason, KD and Kyrie played some of the worst basketball in their careers. Al Horford, a guy that was labeled washed after he was acquired again, dominated Brooklyn inside and showed, I can still play and I want that guaranteed money when we make the finals. In round 2, they then found themselves with their backs up against the wall, first none other than the defending champion Milwaukee Bucks, who very fortunately for the Celtics were without Chris Middleton. In his absence, the opposition gained up and limited Giannis Antetokounmpo. Sure, the younger, less experienced Celtics struggled adjusting to Milwaukee's size at times, but when it mattered most, they leveraged Milwaukee's offensive deficiencies into taking advantage of the personnel on the defensive end. And so even while they were down 3-2 going into Game 6, they never actually lost control. When they needed it, Jayson Tatum, then Grant Williams stepped up and delivered. And when looking at their front court, it was a world of a difference compared to the bubble, where all they had was Daniel Tice, and now they basically had a young PJ Tucker and Grant Williams, a pogo stick defensive center looking better off of his surgically repaired knee, and of course Big Al, who can stabilize both ends of the floor. With their sights set on the finals, the Miami Heat then came out and delivered a fatal blow in the ECF. The Celtics did come in rolling, yet struggled versus their defense, even coming out flat and lethargic in Game 3. But when the series was on the line, they responded. Each of the two teams were hampered by injuries, and looked like a shell of themselves by the end. But the prevailing storyline would be how Boston survived struggles with their own sloppiness. I would actually argue Miami's opportunistic defense woke the Celtics up to a degree. Some of Boston's deficiencies in this matchup were more of a personnel thing, but a lot of the same costly mistakes they made again and again were a lot more related to their mental approach to the game. Now at the end of Game 7, they were a Jimmy Butler pull-up 3 away from going home not with an Eastern Conference crown. The shot did not go in, and the Celtics found themselves in the NBA Finals. Al Horford got his guaranteed money, and the Celtics spent the night celebrating. The path getting here wasn't linear, filled with twists and turns which don't make much sense. And if we're going to be quite honest, Boston has their work cut out for them in the finals. Their margin of error is as slim as it gets. With respect and admiration for the way the Celtics turned their season around and the story they have become, there are clear reasons, and primarily experience and talents, that Golden State is heavy favorites in this matchup. If the Celtics lose in the finals, bearing some sort of unforeseen embarrassments, we will have just watched the NBA's greatest in-season turnarounds. If they do find a way, though, as heavy underdogs to win this thing, we're just living in a movie. But when looking throughout Boston's season, at every moment where it mattered most, they responded at the exact time they needed to. And at the same time, they're one of one, where a team the masses think should shake it all up, then go on to sweep a preseason favorite in the first rounds, before then winning 2 Game 7s versus the defending conference champions. But regardless, the fact this team finds themselves playing June basketball is nothing short of amazing. Thank you all for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.